Next up, when disgraced chemist Sonja Farak was first arrested for tampering with evidence at the state's drug lab at UMass Amherst in 2013, prosecutors charged her with stealing cocaine from just 2 samples she was supposed to have tested. The case followed another high-profile drug lab scandal in Boston, in which Annie Ducan was charged with falsifying test results, which would ultimately lead to more than 20,000 overturned cases. Then Attorney General Martha Coakley's office prosecuted both chemists, and at the time the AG argued that, quote, on its face, the scope of the Farak case was nothing like Ducan's and did not implicate the reliability of testing done or fairness to defendants. But years after Farak pled guilty, served 13 months in prison, and was granted immunity, she admitted in grand jury testimony to using drugs from the lab every day during work for years. Testimony that was dramatized in a 2020 Netflix docuseries, How to Fix a Drug Scandal.
I was smoking at the lab, smoking at home. I actually smoked in the evidence room. I was totally controlled by my addiction.
Ultimately, Farak's misconduct led to the dismissal of more than 16,000 cases, but big questions remain about why that took so long, what role state prosecutors played in the delay. We now know that on the day she was arrested, mental health worksheets were found in Farak's car that included details about her drug use. But Assistant Attorney General Kasmir didn't include that information in what she passed on to the attorneys who were looking to overturn convictions based on Farak's analysis. And fellow Assistant AG Chris Foster later assured a judge that the office had disclosed all their evidence. It had not. But eventually a defense attorney did get hold of the documents, leading to a 2017 review in which a Superior Court judge called the prosecutor's actions a fraud upon the court. Now, Kasmir and Foster, along with John Werner, who led the AG's criminal bureau at the time, are under investigation by the state's Board of Bar Overseers for their actions and face a range of possible punishments, including disbarment. We invited all 3 to submitted statements to us. I'm joined by Senior Litigation Counsel for the Innocence Project, Nina Morrison, who filed the complaint against 2 of the prosecutors that triggered that review. Nina, it's good to meet you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You know, these matters are remarkable, not only because of the number of cases, well, actually the number of lives affected, but because it's quite rare for prosecutors to face ethical charges. Is this because they have broad professional immunity? Is that why we don't hear about it much?
So there's a few reasons we don't hear about it much. One is that they have immunity from civil lawsuits, meaning people who've been harmed. If you get harmed by a police officer, you can sue the police department or the individual police officer. But prosecutors have what's called near absolute immunity from civil lawsuits, so that if they present false testimony against you in court, hide evidence, typically they can't be sued, and that's under Supreme Court case law. But what we're seeing now in these cases is different. This is personal bar discipline, meaning should they have licenses to practice law anymore, or should they be suspended from practice? And that is something that prosecutors don't have immunity from. It's just that these kinds of cases are very rarely brought against them.
Let's talk about the individuals involved, starting with Kasmir, who was the lead prosecutor of Farak. Here's an excerpt from Netflix's How to Fix a Drug Scandal. She's being questioned by defense attorney Luke Ryan in front of Hamden Superior Court Judge Richard Carey. This is from 2016.
Who would be turning over discovery to the defendants? Whose job is that?
The Attorney General's office.
And was that done?
There was a breakdown.
There was a breakdown. What exactly do you believe are her ethical violations, Nina?
So ultimately, this is a question that the hearing officer for the Board of Bar Overseers, Alan Rose, is going to decide. He had 21 days of testimony this fall from Ms. Kasmir herself, as well as many others involved. So it's hard to sum it up in just a few minutes. But the gist of it, and what we filed the complaint based on, was the fact that she herself received emails from a lead detective that were called Farak admissions. And what we know now is that those were admissions to drug use by Ms. Farak herself, the former analyst, as well as information from the detective as the investigation unfolded, that there were suspected cases in which Farak had possibly taken cocaine or tampered with oxycodone pills. And all of that was really important evidence, including those mental health worksheets you referenced earlier, in which Farak documented going back to 2011, more than a year before her arrest, her use of drugs on the job. And Kasmir, having personally received those, we think had an obligation, a legal obligation and an ethical obligation to turn those over. And even when she was personally subpoenaed by Luke Ryan and other defense lawyers, she didn't do so. Her defense seems to be that wasn't her job, that she relied on other people to get that information out. And that's a question the hearing officer is going to have to decide. But at least one judge and the High Court in Massachusetts have already said that they did not find that credible and that they thought that was her job.
And by the way, we did request her presence. We got neither that nor a statement from her. Let's move to Chris Foster, who's another assistant attorney general on the case. She assured the court that everything had been turned over. And she says that she said that, made that representation because a colleague had told her it had all been turned over. Here's a little bit from her, again, being questioned by Luke Ryan in Netflix's How to Fix a Drug Scandal.
Sitting here today, do you believe that everything had been turned over, as you told Judge Kinder back in September of 2013?
I can't say either way. To date, I haven't seen any of the documents in this matter. I have not reviewed one document in the fraud case.
Let me just repeat that. I have not reviewed one document in the Farak case. She essentially, it sounds to me like her defense was, I'm a junior lawyer here. I essentially do what I'm told. And I think she said something like, I don't challenge my supervisor. What's her violation in your estimation, Nina?
So it's our view and the view of the Board of Bar Overseers that's pursuing disciplinary charges against her that she had a legal and ethical obligation to ask basic questions and do some due diligence to verify what she was being told before she went and told a judge at a hearing that potentially affected thousands of lives that everything had been turned over. And her defense is that she relied on her supervisors. We believe that she had an obligation either to look at the file herself or at least to ask questions. What was turned over? When? Who was it turned over to? Do we have a record of it? I mean, this is the kind of thing I would expect my law students to do or a first-year lawyer working for me before they went into court. And while Ms. Foster was new to the office, she wasn't new to prosecution. She'd been handling murder cases on appeal at the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office for years. She knew her way around a courtroom. It may be, as she said, that she didn't think she should be challenging her superiors, but our system really depends on prosecutors at all levels of the justice system being willing to ask hard questions to make sure that justice is done. And that's one of the things I personally took away from her testimony as being so troubling, that she thought she was doing enough by not asking any questions.
She did send a statement to us, less about her case and more about you, I guess. Here's an excerpt. The Innocence Project is founded on the proposition that people are often accused and even convicted of things they did not actually do. This is from her lawyers. Chris Foster is one of those people. The Innocence Project's refusal to even consider the possibility that Ms. Foster is one of those people would be ironic were it not so calculated. In no other case has the Innocence Project declared a person guilty while the jury was still deliberating. What's your brief response to that, Nina?
So I've heard a version of this kind of attack pretty much every time that I or my colleagues at the Innocence Project have ever accused any public official, especially a prosecutor, of misconduct. There's a big difference between somebody who's accused of a crime and waiting for a jury to hear the evidence and a public official who's already herself given testimony twice under oath and who's already been found by a court to have committed egregious misconduct and fraud on the court. These are not disciplinary allegations we make lightly. We receive, dozens of cases every year where people come to us wanting us to weigh in on misconduct, and we choose them very carefully. But this is one that we did based on the facts and the evidence. And this is something that affects prosecution day in and day out. I mean, we think we have an obligation to call attention to the misconduct while it's happening. This disciplinary proceeding has taken almost 4 years now. And meantime, there are prosecutors all over the country who may be tempted to do what Ms. Foster did and to say, I'm just going to rely on what other people tell me and I'm not going to ask any questions. And in our view, that's just a recipe for more wrongful convictions. So we really believe we have an obligation to speak out about it. That's not in any way to prejudge this hearing. Mr. Rose and then the BDO will have to decide whether she keeps her law license or not. But I think what she's testified to really speaks for itself in a lot of ways.
finally, the supervisor, the head of the criminal division there in the AG's office, John Verner, you didn't file a complaint against him. The Board of Bar Overseers expanded to include him. His response essentially is, I don't micromanage. I assume that when my people said they turned over documents, they turned them over. His statement to us from his lawyers essentially said he's been a prosecutor for 20 years, highly respected, et cetera, et cetera. Based on watching these weeks of hearings, what's your reaction to his defense, Nina?
So I'm more comfortable sort of describing what it was, the case that was presented by the BBO, since this was not a complaint that we filed and not part of the investigation that we did.
Sure.
But I did note at the hearing that there were a number of meetings, emails, written correspondence, draft pleadings that Mr. Verner was copied on, that I think the BBO made a strong case that he was obligated not just to examine, but to ensure that the people working for him did what they were supposed to do as a supervisor, and also that he was Ms. Kasmir's co-counsel on Sonja Farak's prosecution, and as a result, took on many of the obligations that people in active prosecutions do. So it was both as a lawyer and as a supervisor, and that he was alerted at multiple instances to the existence of these materials, and it was his job to find out and make sure that they were disclosed.
Nina, I only have about 30, 45 seconds left. Did you file this because you believe punishment, or at least an investigation and possible punishment against at least two of these prosecutors was appropriate, or because you wanted to send a message beyond the walls of these thousands of cases to other prosecutors who you think may be crossing lines? Which was it?
So it was a little of both. I mean, we would never play with people's lives or ask for accountability to send a message to other people if we didn't believe that there were evidence-based reasons to hold individuals accountable. But, you know, in part because of the attention these cases have received, in part because of the 24,000 drug cases that have been affected by them, what the BBO does in this case really matters for other cases and other people. And on a record like this, if there's not accountability, it sends, we think, a very dangerous message that this kind of behavior and this kind of these kind of missteps are sanctioned, and that we think would be a mistake. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the BBO and to the hearing officer about what to do, but that was our goal.
Nina Morrison, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.